"Sell your house, Dad. We're drowning in debt." That's how my son Dale dropped it on me. Right there at my kitchen table, between the meatloaf and mashed potatoes I'd spent 2 hours preparing. No lead up, no sugarcoating, no "hey Dad, we need to talk about something serious." Just straight to the point, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I'm Wayne Patterson, 58 years old, and I've been living in this house for 30 years now. Built most of it myself when Dale was just a little kid running around the construction site, getting into everything. My wife Ruth passed 5 years ago from cancer, and since then it's just been me rattling around in these rooms, but it's my home, you know. Every board, every nail, every piece of trim work, I put my sweat and blood into this place. Hell, I even poured the foundation myself one scorching July weekend back in '94. I set my fork down and looked at Dale across the table. He's 32 now, married to Nancy for 4 years, and they've been having what Ruth would have called champagne taste on a beer budget for as long as I can remember. But asking me to sell my house? That was entering new territory entirely. "That's a serious thing to ask," I said, keeping my voice level and controlled. The same tone I used to use when Dale was 16 and came home 2 hours past curfew. Nancy jumped in quick, like she'd been waiting for her cue. "It wouldn't be permanent, Wayne, just until we get back on our feet financially, maybe a year, less if we're lucky, and Dale's next commission comes through." Dale nodded, still not really looking me in the eye. "It would give us breathing room, Dad. The mortgage payment, the credit cards, the car payments, everything just piled up faster than we expected. We thought we had it under control." I let that sit for a minute, feeling the weight of what they were asking. Outside my kitchen window, I could hear the Hendersons' golden retriever barking at something in their backyard next door. Same sound I'd been hearing for 15 years now. Routine, stable, normal. The kind of normal you build over decades of working 50-hour weeks and putting every extra dollar into making your house a home. The dining room where we sat had Ruth's china cabinet against the far wall, filled with the good dishes we used maybe 3 times a year. The hardwood floors were original, refinished by my own hands 10 years ago when Ruth decided the old carpet had to go. Every scratch and ding had a story. The mark by the doorway where Dale had dragged his baseball bat. The spot near the window where Ruth's Christmas tree had leaked sap. 30 years of life lived in these rooms. You don't need this much space anymore, Dale continued, finally meeting my eyes. "It's just you here now. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, the workshop, and the basement. It's a lot for one person." There it was, not just about their debt, about my life being expendable, unnecessary, too much for what I supposedly needed. Now, I leaned back in my chair and studied him. This was the same kid I'd taught to swing a hammer when he was 8, to change a tire when he was 16, to balance a checkbook when he went off to college. Now he was sitting at my table, telling me my home was too big for me. The kitchen where I'd made this meal was Ruth's pride and joy. We'd renovated it together 12 years ago, her picking out the cabinets while I handled the plumbing and electrical. The island where I'd prepped tonight's dinner was made from reclaimed barn wood I'd found at an estate sale. Every morning I made my coffee at that counter, looking out the window at the vegetable garden Ruth had started, and I'd kept going after she died. "Why don't you sell yours first?" I asked. The room went dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood. Dale's fork stopped halfway to his mouth and he stared down at his plate like it might have the answers written in the gravy. Nancy sucked in a sharp breath like I'd slapped her across the face. From across the table, Carol Brooks, Nancy's mother who'd driven up from Phoenix specifically for this little family meeting, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Oh, Wayne," Carol said, using that tone people use when they think you're being unreasonable. "It's not the same situation at all. Young couples need support when they're building their future. They're just starting out." I looked at her, then back at Dale. He didn't correct her, didn't even try to jump in with a different explanation. That's when it clicked for me like a light switch being flipped. This wasn't a conversation we were having. This was a presentation they'd rehearsed. They'd already decided what I should do, probably talked it through over dinner at their place last week, maybe even practiced the words they'd use. Dale cleared his throat and straightened up in his chair. "We've thought this through carefully, Dad. If you sell this place, we can clear most of the debt and start fresh. Then you can move in with us. The spare bedroom is already set up, and it would actually save you money too. No more property taxes, utilities, maintenance costs." Nancy nodded along like a bobblehead. "We have that nice guest room with its own bathroom. You wouldn't be alone anymore, and we'd be right there if you needed anything. Doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, whatever comes up." Carol added her piece to the sales pitch. "It's practical, Wayne. Families do this kind of thing all the time these days. Multi-generational living is becoming very common." I listened without saying a word, letting each piece of their argument fall into place like dominoes. Sell my house, move into their spare bedroom, trade my independence for their supervision, give up everything I'd built over 30 years so they could keep their lifestyle and their status in that fancy neighborhood they couldn't actually afford. We'd take care of everything, Dale said, finally meeting my eyes with what he probably thought was sincerity. You'd never have to worry about house payments or repairs or any of that stuff again. I don't worry about any of that now, I replied simply. He shifted again, leaning forward like proximity might make his argument more convincing. Dad, you've always been there for me. You helped me through college, helped with the down payment on our townhouse, co-signed my first car loan. This is just continuing that support. And there it was, laid out as clear as day, not a request for help between family members, a bill being called in. Like all those years of supporting him, of being a father, had been some kind of loan that was now coming due with interest. I help people build, I said quietly, my voice steady as the foundation I'd poured for this house. I don't replace what they should be carrying themselves. Nancy's face tightened like someone had pulled a drawstring. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of irritation that crossed her features. It's not about replacing anything, Wayne. It's just that things are different now than when you were our age. Everyone we know is moving forward constantly. Bigger homes, newer cars, better neighborhoods. We thought we were keeping up with where we should be, but we're falling behind. Her voice got faster toward the end, higher pitched, like she hadn't meant to let that part slip out. But there it was, the real reason laid bare. This wasn't about financial necessity or family emergency. This was about keeping up appearances, about maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And somehow, I was supposed to bankroll their status anxiety. Dale picked up the thread where Nancy left off, like they'd practiced this routine. This would fix everything, Dad. Give us the time we need to reset, to get our careers back on track. Reset. Like their money problems were just a computer that needed to be unplugged and plugged back in. Like years of overspending and poor choices could be erased with the right button press. I'd heard that word a lot from Dale over the years. Reset after he dropped out of his first college major. Reset after he quit 3 different jobs in 2 years. Reset after he bought that motorcycle he couldn't afford and had to sell 6 months later. I didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch out and fill the room like smoke. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the block. Probably Mrs. Garcia getting her weekly yard work done before the sun got too hot. Everything normal. Everything in its predictable place. The kind of steady routine that comes from living within your means and not constantly chasing the next upgrade. I understand what you're asking, I finally said. Dale perked up immediately, his shoulders relaxing like he thought he'd won the lottery. But I'm not going to do it. The words landed clean and final. No drama, no raised voices, no theatrical gestures. Just simple fact delivered the same way I'd tell someone the weather forecast. Dale blinked hard, like he was trying to clear his vision. Dad, I raised you, I said, not louder than before, just clearer. I put you through school, helped you get started, taught you right from wrong. I don't owe you my house on top of that. Nancy shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her composure starting to crack around the edges. Carol's friendly mask began slipping too, showing something harder underneath. You're being selfish, Carol said bluntly, dropping the sweet grandmother act she'd been putting on all evening. They're trying to build a future here. You're in a position to make that easier, and you're choosing not to. I turned to look at her directly, this woman who'd driven 300 miles to sit at my table and tell me what I should do with my own property. Then give them your house. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier, more telling. Carol's mouth pressed into a thin, tight line, but she didn't have a comeback ready for that one. Because of course she wasn't going to give up her retirement condo in Phoenix. Of course she wasn't going to sacrifice her security for their poor planning. I glanced back at Dale. He wasn't arguing anymore, wasn't pushing harder or trying a different angle, just sitting there staring down at his plate like he'd run out of prepared material. And that's when I realized something that hit me like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected to have to convince me of anything, he just expected me to say yes. In his mind, this was already a done deal. Dad's house gets sold, problem solved, life goes on. My feelings about it, my attachment to the place, my need for independence, none of that had factored into their planning. I was just a resource to be activated when needed. They left about an hour later after some awkward small talk about the weather and Nancy's job prospects. Polite goodbyes all around, promises to talk more about this soon, Dale giving me a stiff hug that felt like he was going through the motions. But I could see it in all their faces as they walked to their car. This conversation wasn't over. This was just round one. By the end of that week, my phone started ringing. First, it was my brother Tony calling from Denver, where he'd retired after 35 years running heavy equipment. Dale says, "You won't help them out of their financial jam," he said without any preamble. "That true, Wayne. Depends on what you mean by help," I replied. "Come on, man. House that big. just you rattling around in it, kids drowning in debt, and you've got the life preserver right there. I could hear it in his voice, the same talking points, the same simplified version of events. This story was already making the rounds, getting passed along the family network like a game of telephone. Dale hadn't exactly lied about what happened. He'd just arranged the truth to make me sound unreasonable. My cousin Linda called next. Then Dale's godfather Kevin. Then Ruth's sister Margaret from Wisconsin. Same story every time, with slight variations. Wayne's being stubborn. Wayne's got more house than he needs. Wayne's not thinking about family. Nobody asked what I had actually said during that dinner conversation. Nobody wanted to hear my side of it. They all just repeated the version they'd been given, the one that made Dale the struggling young father and me the selfish old man sitting on resources I didn't need. I didn't bother trying to correct the record. People believe what they want to believe, especially when the story confirms what they already think they know about family obligations and generational responsibility. My daily routine stayed exactly the same, up at 6 a.m. for coffee on the back porch, checking the vegetable garden Ruth had planted and I'd expanded over the years. Reading the newspaper at the kitchen island, same spot where I'd eaten breakfast for 30 years. Working in my basement workshop on furniture repair projects for neighbors, keeping my hands busy and my mind occupied. What changed was quieter but unmistakable. Dale's weekly check-in calls got shorter, then less frequent. When he did call, there was a distance in his voice that hadn't been there before, like something fundamental had shifted between us and we were both pretending not to notice. Nancy stopped calling altogether. No more updates about her real estate career, no more invitations to holiday dinners or birthday celebrations. Just silence where there used to be connection. The family network that had once included me started operating around me instead. I'd hear about gatherings after they happened, see photos on social media of events I hadn't been invited to. Nothing dramatic or openly hostile. Just the quiet rearrangement of relationships that happens when someone doesn't play their expected role. But the real change came 3 weeks later, when an envelope showed up in my mailbox that would make everything crystal clear. The envelope wasn't addressed to me directly. Dale's name was printed across the front in bold letters, but underneath it, in smaller print, was my home address. For a moment I just stared at it, confused about why Dale's mail was coming to my house. Then I remembered something from years back when he was 22 and trying to establish credit. I'd co-signed one document for him. Just one. A small personal loan to help him buy his first decent car. I opened it without thinking twice. The language was all legal jargon and fine print, but the numbers jumped off the page like they were written in red ink. Mortgage payment, 60 days past due. Amount owed, $3,847. Credit card balances, $23,400 across 4 different cards, all maxed out, all over limit. Late fees piling up like snow in a January blizzard. Car payments, 45 days behind on both vehicles. Nancy's BMW lease and Dale's pickup truck, both with payments higher than my monthly grocery budget. I sat at my kitchen table reading through page after page of financial carnage, feeling like I was looking at the aftermath of a tornado. This wasn't the picture Dale had painted during that dinner. This wasn't a little behind or temporarily tight. This was full-scale financial disaster, the kind that takes years of poor decisions to create. I picked up the phone and called him. "Dad?" He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "I got some mail today," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Addressed to you but delivered here." There was a pause, not confusion, recognition. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "I meant to tell you about that," he said finally. "Tell me what exactly." "It's not as bad as it looks on paper, really." I waited, letting the silence stretch out until he felt compelled to fill it. The interest rate on the house adjusted higher than we expected when we bought it. Variable rate mortgage seemed like a good idea at the time. We've been managing the payments, but when it jumped from 4% to 7.5%, it caught us off guard. I looked down at the paperwork spread across my table. "Managing? Dale, you're 60 days behind." Another pause. "The credit cards too," he admitted, his voice getting smaller. "We had to furnish the house when we moved in, make it look professional for Nancy's real estate clients. Then there were some repairs, some improvements. Nancy's real estate career brought in maybe $2,000 a month on a good month. Most months it was closer to $800. I'd never understood how they thought that income could support their lifestyle, but I'd kept my opinions to myself. "What about the car payments?" I asked. "The lease payments are higher than we planned, but that's temporary. Nancy needed something reliable for showing properties, and I needed the truck for work." There was that word again, temporary. In Dale's vocabulary, everything was always temporary. The overspending, the missed payments, the poor planning. It was all just a temporary situation that would resolve itself somehow. "How many payments total are you behind on?" I asked. Silence answered that question better than words could have. I looked at the documents scattered in front of me, adding up the numbers in my head. This wasn't financial pressure or a rough patch. This was financial collapse, the kind that happens when people spend years living beyond their means and finally hit the wall. You weren't asking me to help you, I said quietly. You were asking me to save you from this. That's not fair, Dad. It's accurate, son. He didn't argue with that. Couldn't argue with it, because the evidence was right there in black and white. I folded the documents back into the envelope, creasing the edges carefully. That dinner conversation replayed in my mind, but now it looked completely different. Not a son asking his father for family support during a difficult time. A drowning man trying to pull someone else underwater with him. The next morning, I drove downtown to see Keith Williams, the attorney who'd handled Ruth's will and helped me set up some basic estate planning after she died. Keith had been practicing law for 25 years and had seen every kind of family financial drama you could imagine. I need to talk about asset protection, I told him after settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Keith nodded like he'd been expecting this conversation. Let me guess, adult children with money problems, something like that. He pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. How bad is their situation? I gave him the numbers from Dale's paperwork. Keith's eyebrows went up as the figures got higher, but his expression stayed professionally neutral. And they've asked you for help. They've asked me to sell my house and move in with them, so they can use the proceeds to pay off their debts. Keith set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Wayne, I've seen this exact scenario dozens of times. Adult child gets in over their head financially, starts looking at elderly parents' assets as the solution to their problems. It rarely ends well for the parent. What are my options? Several. We can set up a trust structure, put your house and other major assets into it. You remain the beneficiary for life, but the assets are legally protected from creditors and can't be accessed by family members, even with your permission. He explained how the trust would work, how it would protect everything I'd built from being used to bail out Dale's poor financial decisions. The paperwork would take about 2 weeks to complete, and once it was done, my house would be legally untouchable. There's something else, Keith said as I was getting ready to leave. If your son is this far behind on payments, and if he's been using your address for financial documents, you need to check your credit report. Make sure he hasn't tried to open any accounts using your information. That afternoon, I went online and pulled my credit report from all 3 agencies. Most of it was exactly what I expected. My mortgage, 1 credit card I paid off every month, utilities in my name. All current, all in good standing. But there at the bottom was something that made my blood run cold. An application for a home equity line of credit on my property filed 3 weeks ago. Under my name and social security number, the application had been denied. Apparently my bank required in-person verification for loans that large, but someone had tried to use my house as collateral for a $75,000 credit line. Someone who had access to all my personal information. I called Keith Williams immediately. That's identity theft, Keith said when I told him about the credit application and attempted fraud. Your son tried to use your property as collateral without your knowledge or consent. We filed a police report that afternoon. Detective Martinez took my statement and copies of all the documents, the credit application, the past due notices, everything. She explained that financial fraud between family members was more common than people realized, and that it often escalated if not stopped early. Most people don't want to press charges against their own kids, she said. But sometimes legal consequences are the only thing that breaks the pattern. I signed the paperwork to move forward with the investigation. It wasn't an easy decision, but Dale had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Trying to mortgage my house behind my back wasn't desperation. It was theft, plain and simple. Keith expedited the trust paperwork, and within a week, my house and major assets were legally protected. Dale could beg, threaten, or manipulate all he wanted, but he couldn't touch what I'd built anymore. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, when Dale showed up at my door unannounced. He looked different, thinner, more stressed, with the kind of desperate edge that comes from running out of options. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I let him in, and we sat at the same kitchen table where this whole mess had started. But this time, the balance of power had shifted completely. "The police called me," he said, his voice tight, "about some credit application. I know. I filed the report." His face went pale. "Dad, I can explain." "You tried to steal my house," I said simply. "There's nothing to explain. It wasn't stealing. I was going to pay it back. We just needed bridge financing until Nancy's real estate license got reinstated, and my next project came through. Nancy's license had been suspended for 6 months due to some ethics violation. She'd tried to keep quiet. Another detail they'd conveniently left out of their original sob story. "You forged my signature on a loan application using my property as collateral," I said. "That's a felony, Dale." He slumped forward in his chair, the fight going out of him. "We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house, the cars, probably Nancy's career." I was desperate, and your solution was to make me lose everything instead. That stopped him cold. For maybe the first time in his adult life, Dale was forced to confront the reality of what he'd been asking. Not help, not support. Transfer of his problems onto someone else's shoulders. What happens now, he asked quietly. Now you learn to fix your own mess, I said. You file for bankruptcy if you have to. You downsize to something you can actually afford. You get jobs that pay the bills instead of jobs that sound impressive. The police will pursue charges unless you make this right. Full restitution for the attempted fraud, financial counseling, proof that you're taking responsibility for your situation. He sat there for several minutes processing what I'd said. Finally, he nodded. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it, the dinner, the pressure, the loan application, I never should have. His voice trailed off. No, you shouldn't have, but you did. Now the question is what you do next. The changes that followed weren't dramatic, but they were real. Dale and Nancy filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which wiped out most of their unsecured debt but cost them their townhouse and both cars. They moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place they would have turned their noses up at 6 months earlier. Dale found steady work doing construction management, using skills he'd learned from me but had considered beneath him when he was chasing bigger deals. Nancy got a job doing medical billing while she worked to get her real estate license reinstated. Neither job was glamorous, but both provided steady paychecks. The legal situation resolved when Dale made full restitution and completed a financial responsibility program. The charges were dropped, but the lesson was learned. There would be no more bailouts, no more rescue operations, no more transferring consequences to other people. Our relationship changed too, but in a better way. When Dale called now, it was to talk, not to ask for something. When he visited, it was because he wanted to spend time together, not because he needed money or favors. Last month, he brought his toolbox over and helped me repair the back deck stairs. We worked together for 3 hours, barely talking, just enjoying the satisfaction of fixing something that needed fixing. It reminded me of when he was young and actually wanted to learn from his old man. Thanks for not giving up on me, he said as we cleaned up the tools. I didn't give up on you, I replied. I gave up on rescuing you. There's a difference. He nodded, understanding finally sinking in. The difference between helping someone build something and just handing them something they didn't earn. That's right. As I watched him drive away in his modest used sedan paid for in cash, no loan needed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in my son, not for what he owned or where he lived, but for what he'd learned to carry on his own. I'm still Wayne Patterson, 58 years old, living in the house I built with my own hands. The vegetable garden Ruth started is bigger now, and I've added a workshop where I teach neighborhood kids basic carpentry skills. The house is still too big for one person, according to some people's logic, but it's exactly the right size for my life. And my son is finally learning to build a life that fits his own foundation instead of trying to borrow someone else's. That's worth more than any house, any amount of money, any family peace bought with someone else's sacrifice. Sometimes the best help you can give someone is refusing to save them from consequences they need to learn from. It's not easy, and it's not popular, but it's real love, the kind that builds character instead of just solving problems. The kind of love that helps people become who they're supposed to be instead of who they think they want to be. Real strength isn't measured by what you can give away, but by what you're wise enough to keep, and teaching others to earn what they truly need builds character that lasts generations. The hardest thing a parent can do is watch their child struggle with consequences, but sometimes that struggle is exactly what transforms them from someone who takes to someone who builds.